Hey everybody, welcome back to the Franlung podcast. Today we're going to take another look at our Who Is series. In this case, we're going to take a look at Victor Hoffer. So Victor Hoffer hit my radar in quarterfinals this year, where he finished 10th worldwide and 3rd in Europe. So really up there at the top, the lead of the elite. And then kind of some interesting stats that popped up to him within quarterfinals. So he is the youngest male athlete to win a worldwide quarterfinal event. Last year in 2022, he was 19 when he won Test 2 globally. And then in 2023, also has another worldwide quarterfinal event win there. So again, he's the only man or male athlete to do that in both 2022 and 2023. So maybe want to learn a little bit more about Victor Hoffer to see kind of how he's going to fit into the semifinal picture in Europe this year. So from a competitive CrossFit standpoint, he's really only hit the scene the last couple of years, being 20 this season. So really last year was his first kind of foray into the main field. He finished 69th in European quarterfinals last year, so it's just outside of that bubble for the semifinals perspective. And then looking at his quarterfinal results last year, so again, kind of up and down. So he had two events in the top 20 in Europe, including that event win in Test 2, and then the other three events were all outside the top 100. His worst event was the other total, where he finished 400th in Europe. So again, like, makes sense. 19-year-old may not necessarily have the strength some of the older athletes did, and then got beat up a bit in Test 5 as well, which had the cal row burpee box jump overs and the 185-pound snatch. So again, just not seeing kind of that strength element there for him. He went on to compete semifinals last year as a team athlete with CrossFit Griffin, I believe. Or Grillin, my apologies, CrossFit Grillin. So he has been on that team in semifinals twice. Fast forward to this year in semifinals, obviously now. So really consistent for him across the board within the European semifinals. So his worst event was a 33rd place finish in Test 3 or Workout 3, which was the burpee box jump overs and the clean and jerk. So still seeing that heavy barbell holding him back a bit, but it's really great to see from a progression and skill development standpoint that all his other event finishes were 26 or better. So kind of really propelled him to the top of the leaderboard there. So interesting to see him in the mix from that perspective. That said, quarterfinals, the Open, it's online. It's kind of a different type of test than the in-person competitions. So again, looking at Victor Hoffer, last year in the offseason, after he kind of didn't advance within semifinals, he did compete in 3 separate events. So the first one, end of June, was the French Throwdown. So he finished 13th within this group. It was kind of a mixed bag of athletes that competed here from a European standpoint, almost predominantly European. So a lot of those athletes that failed to qualify for the CrossFit Games, Georgios Karavis ultimately took the victory there. I think he advanced to the games. But then you kind of see some of those top names in that second tier of European athletes. So Jelle Hoste, Luka Ducic, Adrian Moodweiler. So those were the athletes all finishing ahead of him. He was 13th. Kind of a ways back of a podium position, so I guess 240 points back of Luka Ducic, who finished 3rd. So it's going to be tough considering all those athletes, predominantly all the athletes that finished ahead of him, will be competing at semifinals again this year. Then in between that, finished 5th at the German Throwdown. Wasn't the deepest field when you looked at it that standpoint. Ultimately, as a games athlete, Moritz Fiebig took home the championship there, with Hoffer finishing 5th. But then fast forward to Dubai in December, much more competitive field than the French Throwdown, so probably a handful of games athletes, if not more, ahead of him in the rankings. He finished 13th again here, but it's good to see that from more of a competitive field. So you got Fabian Benito Celis, Moritz Fiebig, Brent Fikowski, Jonah Kowski, Luka Ducic, Gillian Bryant, Georgios Karavis, Lazar Ducic, all placing ahead of him. So kind of that caliber athlete compared to the French throwdown is much higher for Dubai, as we would expect as one of the premier off-season events. So it's interesting to see that he's still holding his own within that group. So to see that improvement within his respective competitiveness between French Throwdown and Dubai, even though his final ranking was the same, he was able to establish himself within that group again over some other semifinal athletes that will also be in the group. So below him was Luka Vanchek, Damian Martinez Satorres, and a couple other athletes that withdrew. So it was good to see him there. So when we look, or at least when I take a look at how he's going to place or how he's going to fit into that European semifinal, really is going to be one of those guys that is just sitting on the bubble in terms of competitiveness and whether they're going to make it. So the European semifinal, they got 11 spots. So really, Dubai being 13th, he is going to be right in that mix. As we've seen from semifinals to last year, he does have kind of those elite skill sets with the handstand push-ups and the handstand walks, which were both in the events that he won. So if the programming plays into his strengths from a gymnastics standpoint, definitely could see him taking one of those top 11 spots. It's just going to be really up to the programming. If it is going to be heavier, especially with a field of 60, it could drop him down a fair amount if there is kind of those 1 rep max or speed lat or something along those lines, which could probably push him back into the landing. So it will be interesting to see Hoffer, only 20 years old, so it'll give him good experience. Probably the deepest field that he's ever competed in at European semifinals this year. And then we'll just have to see again how his advancement goes. 2 months as a full-time athlete for a 20-year-old, he will be able to make a lot of gains over this time, and hopefully quarterfinals gave him a little bit more perspective of where his kind of overall competitiveness needs some work. So will be interesting to see how Hoffer plays out. But again, could be a 10th, could be an 18th, just depending on how programming goes and how the rest of this field goes. So fingers crossed for Victor Hoffer that he does finish in those top 11 spots. And with that, thanks for listening to the podcast today. As always, give us a follow on Instagram at Franlung Analytics. Just got a bunch of daily posts there just highlighting different stats and athletes and information as we approach semifinals. And if you did like the show, make sure to give us a like and subscribe. It would be appreciated. So that's all for today. Thanks for listening and happy fitnessing.